You're listening to the ASOTU CON Sessions by Effective live from ASOTU CON 2024.
All right, welcome to ASOTU CON Conversations here at the podcast stage, powered by Effective. I'm sitting down with Steve Greenfield from Automotive Ventures. Thanks so much for joining me.
Michael, it's good to be here.
Holy moly, look at this. If you were ever wondering how many people know you, look at how they're flooding into this space now.
Flooding.
They're like, we heard the name, here we go.
Here we go.
A couple of interesting topics that are on our mind here at ASOTU CON. I want to pick your brain on this. I had this epiphany not too long ago that my 15-year-old is going to learn to drive.
Or not.
Yeah, not on my truck. We already know that. His first reference point for driving a vehicle is going to be a 100% electric vehicle. He will not know what it's like to, as much as I'd love to say we're sourcing a stick shift and I'm going to teach him how to be a man, his first ever reference point for driving a car is going to be an EV. And I'm fascinated by this concept of what does that mean for the next 7 to 10 years, where the adoption of EVs, which also, by the way, have autonomy built in, which I want to pick your brain about. What's the implication of that in the next 7 to 10 years as EV adoption kicks in and more people get comfortable with it?
Does that excite him, the notion of only being on an EV and not an ICE car?
Full admission here, he does not know or believe that we're going to let him learn to drive. I've told him we're buying him a donkey. So he doesn't know yet, but I think he knows. But we haven't had very meaningful conversations about it. But that's what my wife and I are thinking about. He's going to learn to drive a rocket ship.
Nice.
That's basically how we,
nice.
With full autonomy. What are your thoughts on that? How does that? Where does it progress from here? What are you seeing in the automotive landscape?
Yeah, so I'll generalize more to like EV adoption in general. So we sort of seen EV adoption stalling out.
Yeah.
Tesla was obviously the first. They saturated the early adopters that saw largely the adoption of EVs as a status symbol.
Right.
But I do think, you've got a good point. This next generation of shoppers that are 15 and under, are they going to care? They're probably going to see the convenience of an EV being more important than any of the inconvenience of an ICE vehicle, especially as the battery technology gets better. And I think that, you talk to young people, one, there's fewer people getting their driver's licenses early, like probably you and I did.
Sure.
It was a status symbol to get it as early as possible back in the day for me. And I think that the technology in the car is going to be more important than things that might have mattered to us in terms of the car design and or the horsepower in the vehicle. The horsepower is more than anyone can use in an EV anyway.
Right.
So these acceleration times are actually dangerous to allow a 16-year-old into a car that can accelerate to 60 miles an hour in 2 seconds.
Sure.
Doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And I think at the same time, the technology in the car is going to be the big differentiator. The other thing I'll say is it's very interesting to me. Like 20 years ago, there was a definite brand difference. The Japanese cars and the German cars were engineered better. Period. Full stop. Now, the car quality is interchangeable.
Right.
You can take the logos off the cars in the parking lot out here, and you can't even tell the difference.
Sure.
So at this point, it's great for consumers. But I think that it's more and more challenging for the automakers and the dealers, frankly, to be able to, load the lips of their salespeople to differentiate. But I think it is interesting. I'm not an EV naysayer. I think 50 years from now, all cars will be EVs. But the battery technology, the charging infrastructure, all these friction points in the short term will mean the next 5 or 10 years, there's a lot of headwinds against EV adoption.
Interesting. We had a conversation not too long ago on one of our podcasts, and they were talking about how much time they spend up on the Hill in Washington, and that they have conversations about EVs, but there aren't yet any EV chargers available at the Hill at all. And people go, oh, wait, yeah, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I think you're right about that. There's a lot of headwinds. But I also want to talk about something that's being built into EVs more and more, which is a layer of autonomy, right? We see it with the Tesla, and they're constantly, I know they're prodding my wife all the time to say, hey, only $99 a month, you can get the full autonomy experience. And I won't lie, Steve, I'm a nerd. So we tried it once, and it was nerve-wracking. And within about 37 minutes, I realized I hadn't looked at the road and was having a conversation with my wife like that. Just like my feet were kind of like this. How quickly, point being, I got comfortable with that experience. Do you foresee that being the case as we emerge into autonomous vehicles and self-driving and all of those sorts of things? Will people adopt it that quickly, you think?
So I think there's two things. There's regulations, and then there's consumers adoption. And what we'll see is playing out is globally, countries like China.
Right.
And I was over in the Middle East recently. Countries that are much more either monarchies and or effectively dictatorships will be able to force from the top down adoption. And in some of these countries, I get the sense that they may not value human life as much. They're willing to risk the folks on the front line who are actually in these vehicles. Sorry, but I mean, this is the sense I get traveling around.
Don't sugarcoat it. How do you
No,
really
I'm not
feel?
sugarcoating it. But I think in those countries where they're willing just to push through some of the resistance,
Yeah.
they're going to see much faster adoption. And as a result, then automakers in those countries are going to be able to amass more miles and learn more quickly. Tesla has decided that they can effectively use their drivers as guinea pigs, folks like you. Right, to go out there and say, I'm willing to try this and pay for the privilege of doing so. And they're amassing many more miles than the Waymos or the Cruises of the world. But I think that inevitably, the interesting thing is we have, different thresholds for tolerances here, right? There are 42,000 humans who die in car crashes in the US every year, 1.3 million globally. But we won't permit one person to die in a Tesla. So there is this sort of reconciliation we need to have between, are we going to permit, car crashes at all for autonomous vehicles? And right now it seems like that's not the case in the US. We have no permissible deaths allowed for fully autonomous vehicles. And I think that alone is going to differentiate the adoption rate in the US versus other countries.
Interesting. And you've got me thinking about this forced adoption, right? And the thought that came to my mind, Steve, is adoption is still adoption. And in one generation, we won't know the difference. We will have just adopted.
Right.
What do you think going back to your earlier statement, you said, well, I think the way this all kind of ends is everyone's driving
electric.
As
much as it kills me, by the way, because a manual transmission with a V8 makes me resonate with the universe.
And I just can't help but think that Captain Kirk, all those years in the future, was still riding a motorcycle because so I'm thinking maybe we just all need to reinvest in motorcycle dealerships, right? Because there's something to...
There's something to it.
There's something to ripping on that throttle. Thoughts on AI? I mean, there's an interesting tie-in here as it pertains to vehicle technology that there must be an AI layer to autonomy in how they analyze the data, how they determine what the right turning radius is, and all of those sorts of things. What's your take on the tie-in from AI to autonomy?
Well, it's interesting. If you look at the Tesla earning calls, I mean, Tesla has now evolved fairly dramatically from, autonomy has been based on mapping the surroundings and then having the car reference itself where I am in relationship to my mapped surroundings. This latest iteration of the Tesla full self-driving software, which they've renamed, is more generative AI based, where the car is effectively now built on a shared neural network. The cars are learning from each other, and the car is learning to look at the outside world as you would. I mean,
right.
you don't have a mental map of where you're driving,
sure.
Yet you can still be very efficient in being safe driving from here to New York City. And now the cars are effectively mapping more to how you would drive as opposed to historical autonomy, which is to hard code a map and then try to position myself around the map, which gives me hope that, through adverse climate, thunderstorms, rain, snowstorms, et cetera, the cars may be more efficient, but we'll see how this all plays out.
Last thought is it makes me think of safety. You brought up the number of car accidents or fatalities from car accidents throughout the world. The idea of cars learning from each other, assessing the conditions, and where perhaps in a precarious situation, I might be inclined to rip my steering wheel this way and then hit something else. The vehicle will be able to take control and assess millions of other data points that I can't to save everybody's lives. Maybe not 100% success rate, but maybe it gives us something really interesting to think about. As we wind down here, I want to thank you for joining me here on the podcast stage, ASOTU CON Conversations powered by Effective. Steve Greenfield, how can those listening or watching connect with you?
I'm not hard to find, Michael. I'm not hard to find. So
you're right here, in fact.
LinkedIn is probably most efficient. You can email me at steve@automotiveventures.com, go to automotiveventures.com, or find me on LinkedIn.
Love it. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you for listening to this ASOTU CON session by Effective. If you want more content like this, you can check out our other podcasts. We have a daily show called The Automotive Troublemaker, Monday through Friday. Here on podcasts, also live streamed on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook. We also have a long-form podcast called Auto Collabs. And if you just want to go a little deeper into this community, you should sign up for our regular email. We put our heart and soul into it. You can get it for free by going to asotu.com. We'll see you next time.